In the heart of Seattle's financial district, a tower of steel and glass cuts through the clouds. On the 38th floor, where the air smells like fresh coffee and pressure, Ethan Hawthorne rules his empire. Every word he says feels like a command. Every silence, a warning. People say he was born without a smile. Assistants come and go, none lasting more than a month. And maybe that's how he prefers it. Distance, control, no risk of being disappointed again. But life has a way of cracking even the thickest ice. And sometimes, it doesn't take a storm. Just a little bit of clumsiness, and a heart that refuses to give up. Down by the harbor, a young woman named Clara Bennett is fighting her own kind of storm job rejections, unpaid bills, and a dream that keeps slipping away. Two people, walking different paths, about to collide in the most unexpected way. They say every story of change begins with a single mistake, and sometimes, all it takes to melt a frozen heart is one spilled cup of coffee. Let's begin. Morning light crawled across the skyline of Seattle, touching the steel ribs of the Hawthorne Tower until they gleamed like glass and gold. The building stood proud in the heart of the financial district, tall, sharp, and intimidating, just like the man who owned it. Inside, the 38th floor was a world of silence and speed. Heels clicked on marble, keyboards whispered. Nobody spoke louder than necessary, because even sound felt like it needed permission here. Behind a pair of tall glass doors engraved with E. Hawthorne, CEO, a man stood by the window, his reflection blending with the city he controlled. Ethan Hawthorne, 34, tailored suit, perfect posture, and eyes that missed nothing. He didn't sit often. Power seemed to stand with him. A knock came at the door. "Sir, your meeting with the Tokyo investors is in 10 minutes, said a voice. Careful, measured. Ethan didn't turn. "Cancel it. Cancel, sir. They were late last time. I don't repeat mistakes. Draft a message. Tell them to try again next quarter." The assistant hesitated, her fingers tightening around the notepad. "Yes, Mr. Hawthorne." Her voice trembled, just slightly enough for Ethan to hear it. He hated that sound, fear. Not because it bothered him, but because it reminded him how easily people broke. When the door clicked shut again, he exhaled quiet, controlled. Outside the window, the city kept moving. Millions of lives below, each chasing something. He once chased, too. Now he simply built walls. On his desk lay a photo turned face down. The frame was silver, edges worn. He didn't touch it anymore. He told himself he was past that kind of weakness. The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Hawthorne, your secretary. She's leaving. Effective today." He blinked once. "Which one, Ms. Grant, sir? She's, number 10 this year. Number 11, he corrected, his tone flat. "Send HR to my office?" Minutes later, Linda Harris from Human Resources stood before him, mid-40s, sharp glasses, exhausted eyes. She held a resignation letter like a white flag. "Mr. Hawthorne." She said she can't handle the environment anymore, meaning me. Linda swallowed. She used those words. Yes. Silence stretched. Only the clock ticked, marking every second like a tiny judgment. "Find another one," he said finally. "By Monday." Linda nodded, but her voice softened. "Sir, maybe it's not about finding another one. Maybe it's about keeping one." For a brief second, Ethan's jaw tightened. He almost smiled the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. Then find someone who doesn't need to be kept. When she left, the room felt emptier. Even the hum of the air conditioner seemed to retreat from him. Ethan loosened his tie, not from comfort, but habit, a small gesture of control. From his window, the city below looked perfect lines, angles, patterns that never failed. People, on the other hand, they were unpredictable. They disappointed. They left. He picked up the resignation letter still on his desk, scanning the last line. "This position is impossible. No one can work under him. He folded the paper once, then again, until it was a small square between his fingers. He placed it beside the other folded notes in the drawer, each one a quiet reminder that no one lasted. No one ever did. The phone buzzed again. "Sir, do you want me to schedule interviews for next week?" Ethan's reply came slow, almost absent. "Yes, but this time, tell HR to find someone different. Different, sir." He stared out at the fog rolling over the bay. Someone who won't quit before the job starts. When the line went silent, Ethan leaned against the desk, his gaze drifting to the photo frame he always ignored. His reflection flickered in the glass-sharp suit. Cold eyes. The face of someone even he didn't fully recognize anymore. He remembered a voice once telling him, "You can't run a company if you can't keep a heart." He'd laughed then, but the laughter hadn't aged well. Thunder rumbled far away, rolling over the sound. Rain started tapping against the windows, slow, steady, patient. Somewhere below, in a small cafe by the harbor, the sound of that same rain would fall on another life, entirely. Someone who didn't yet know her path was bending toward his. But, for now, Ethan stood alone in his glass tower, a man made of control and silence, surrounded by everything he'd built, and nothing he could feel. He turned the frame upright for just a second, looked at it, then set it face down again. Outside, lightning flashed against the skyline, scattering his reflection into fragments. And if anyone had been there to see him, the man the whole building feared they might have noticed a flicker in his eyes. Not anger, not power, something smaller, softer, almost human. The city didn't notice, but something, however faint, had begun to shift. Morning settled over the 38th floor like a thin layer of frost, the kind that never quite melted, even when the sun tried. Linda Harris sat at her desk, a mug of coffee gone cold beside a stack of resignation letters. 11 this year. She traced the corner of the top sheet with her thumb, the paper soft from being folded too many times. "Again," she whispered, exhaling through her nose. Another one. Her assistant, Kyle, hovered near the doorway with a clipboard and nervous eyes. "Should I start posting the position again?" Ma'am Linda looked up at him, tired but patient. "Yes, same title, same description. Maybe change the tone a little. Make it sound survivable." Kyle almost smiled but didn't dare. "I'll update it right away." When he left, the room fell quiet again, except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant echo of heels in the corridor. Linda leaned back in her chair, eyes drifting toward the glass walls that revealed the rest of the office. Rows of cubicles, faces lowered, conversations that died mid-sentence whenever a certain door opened. That door, Ethan Hawthorne's office. Even now, it loomed like a presence no one wanted to disturb. The blinds were half drawn, the faint silhouette of a man visible behind them, tall, motionless, precise. She could almost sense his concentration, the weight of his silence. Linda had been with Hawthorne Enterprises for 10 years. She'd seen it rise, fall, rise again. She'd seen Ethan inherit the company at 30 and build it into something twice its size, brilliant, relentless, unforgiving, and utterly alone. Her phone buzzed. A message from finance. "We're down another assistant. Productivity's slipping. Please advise." She typed back slowly, working on it, then deleted it. There was no point pretending she could fix this overnight. She stood, walked to the glass wall, and watched the staff below. Every movement was cautious, rehearsed like dancers afraid of missing a step. Even laughter had become a luxury here. People smiled in whispers. It wasn't that Ethan shouted. He didn't need to. His silence did the job for him. A raised eyebrow could cut deeper than a reprimand. A pause in his voice could make grown men sweat. And yet, Linda knew something most didn't. He wasn't cruel, not really. He was empty. A kind of emptiness that looked like power from the outside. She remembered the first time she'd met him years ago, in this same office, when he was still learning to hide his grief behind that perfect composure. Back then, His eyes had a softness to them, something unguarded, but over time, it had hardened into glass. Now, every new hire came in full of hope and left a little more broken. Linda sat back down, rubbing her temples. Maybe it wasn't just Ethan who was tired. Maybe they all were. A faint knock pulled her back. Kyle peeked in again, holding a tablet. "Ma'am, HR portal's ready for the posting. Should I use the old photo of the office for it?" She gave a dry laugh. "Sure. Maybe crop out the fear." He blinked, unsure whether to laugh. "Anything else?" "Yes." Linda hesitated. "Add this line to the description. Looking for someone with resilience, warmth, and a sense of humor." Kyle frowned. "Sense of humor. For Mr. Hawthorne's assistant." She nodded. "Maybe that's exactly what he needs." When he left, Linda stared at the rain streaking down the window. She wondered who would apply this time. Someone bold, probably young. Someone who thought they could handle it until they realized what it meant to work for a man who never smiled. She whispered to herself, almost like a prayer. Maybe the 12th one will last. In the corridor outside, Ethan's door opened. The sound was soft but sharp enough to make the entire floor still. Papers stopped rustling. A printer's hum faded into silence. He stepped out, adjusting his cufflinks, expression unreadable. His voice carried across the space like a winter breeze. "Linda?" She turned. "Yes." "Mr. Hawthorne schedule board meeting at 2. Move the investor call to tomorrow. And send me the updated assistant posting before noon. Already in progress. Sir?" He gave a short nod, eyes scanning the office briefly like a general surveying a field. Every employee found something urgent to do. Then, just as he turned to leave, Linda said quietly, "You know, sir, people are starting to think that position is cursed." Ethan paused mid-step. He didn't look back. Cursed. She met his gaze reflected faintly in the glass. No one lasts more than a month. They're afraid of disappointing you. A beat of silence. "Fear," he said at last, "is efficient. It keeps people sharp." Linda's voice softened. "Or it makes them leave." He turned fully now, eyes colder but quieter. If they can't handle pressure, they don't belong here. And with that, he walked back into his office. The door closed, a quiet thud that felt final. Linda stood there for a moment, her reflection staring back from the glass wall. She could feel everyone's eyes on her, waiting to see what she'd say. But she just shook her head slightly and went back to her desk. That afternoon, when the office emptied for lunch, she sat alone, scrolling through applications. The same names, the same polite cover letters, all trying too hard to sound perfect. She closed the laptop, sighing. "Perfect," she murmured. "That's the problem." Outside, the sky over Seattle had turned gray again, a drizzle misting the windows. Somewhere beyond that city fog, life was happening messy, human, imperfect. Linda tapped her pen against the desk, thinking of what she'd told Kyle. Resilience, warmth, and a sense of humor. She almost smiled. Maybe, just maybe. That's what the 38th floor needed. Not another perfect resume, but someone who didn't flinch at the silence. Someone who could see the man behind the legend and laugh anyway. She didn't know it yet, but in a few days, an application would arrive from a young woman with a clumsy charm and a stubborn streak of optimism. And everything for Ethan, for the company, for everyone watching from behind those glass walls would begin to shift. The screen glowed pale against Clara Bennett's tired face. She had read the same line 3 times, but it still felt like a bruise. "Thank you for your application. Unfortunately," she closed the laptop before finishing the sentence. There was no point. Outside, the harbor shimmered under a thin gray sky. Waves lapped against the wooden docks, steady as breathing, somewhere nearby. A barista called out an order, the sound muffled by the hiss of steaming milk. Clara sat in the corner booth of a small cafe called Harbor Light, surrounded by the scent of coffee and salt. Her hair was pulled up in a loose bun, wisps escaping to frame a face that hadn't smiled much lately. 27, a journalism degree, a collection of unfinished dreams sitting quietly inside a secondhand laptop. She stirred her coffee, watching the cream swirl like a tiny storm. The cup was chipped on one side, the same way she felt about herself. Still useful, just not quite whole. She had sent out 42 applications this month, editing jobs, writing jobs, even one for a bookstore clerk. 42 polite rejections, 42 ways of saying you're not enough. Her phone buzzed, the screen lit up with a bank alert. Balance $12.47. She let out a shaky laugh, not bitter, just tired. The kind of laugh people make when crying feels too heavy. Rough morning? A voice asked from behind the counter. Clara looked up. Maggie, her best friend since college, was wiping a table with her usual mix of speed and sarcasm. Maggie worked mornings here, evenings at a copy shop, and somehow still found energy to look alive. Just the usual rejection parade, Clara said, taking a sip that burned slightly. I'm thinking of framing the next one. A whole wall of failure. Maggie smiled, leaning on the counter. Failure looks good on you. Brings out your eye color. Clara chuckled, flattering. I'm almost broke. My rent's due. And my landlord already looks at me like I'm a charity case. Then stop chasing impossible jobs. Maybe try something temporary. Something that pays. Clara sighed. Like what dishwasher dog walker Maggie hesitated, eyes narrowing. Actually, the HR board at Hawthorne Enterprises just posted an opening this morning. Executive assistant to the CEO? Clara blinked. Wait, the Ethan Hawthorne? Maggie nodded, half grinning. Yep, the guy everyone calls the Ice King. No one lasts more than a month. Clara laughed so hard it drew stares from 2 tables away. That's your idea of helping, putting me in front of a man who terrifies people for a living. Maggie shrugged. You said you wanted a challenge. Plus, rumor says he pays triple the market rate. You'd survive 1 month and live off it for 6. Clara leaned back, letting the idea hang in the air. The cafe light caught on the rim of her mug. She traced it with a finger, her mind racing. Ethan Hawthorne. The name was everywhere: magazines, billboards, interviews where his smile never reached his eyes. A man like that wouldn't even look at her resume. Still, something inside her, that stubborn part that refused to die no matter how often life said no, whispered, "What if I don't know?" She said quietly. I've spent years trying to find a job where words mean something, not just schedules and coffee orders. Maybe, Maggie said softly, it's not about the job. Maybe it's about proving you still can. Clara looked out the window. The ferry horn echoed across the water, deep and steady, like a call to move. The world outside the glass was gray, uncertain, but full of movement. Inside. She sat still, frozen between pride and need. Her rent notice waited on her kitchen table. Her laptop blinked with unpaid bills. Her heart, despite everything, still beat with the quiet insistence of someone who hadn't given up. She turned the laptop back on. The HR posting was still there. Hawthorne Enterprises Executive Assistant to CEO. The description was brief, almost clinical, high attention to detail, ability to work under pressure, discretion required. She scrolled to the bottom. One line stood out. Applicants with resilience and a sense of humor encouraged to apply. She smiled just a little. A sense of humor. Maybe that's all I've got left. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She hesitated only once before typing, Dear hiring manager, I might not be perfect, but I learn fast. I stay calm under pressure, and I don't scare easily. Maybe that's what you need, someone who doesn't quit. Sincerely, Clara Bennett. When she hit send, her heart skipped not from hope exactly, but from motion. For the first time in weeks, she had moved. Maggie returned with 2 refilled coffees. So, you did it, Clara nodded slowly. I did it. Probably the worst idea I've ever had. Or the best, Maggie said, smiling. Sometimes it's the same thing. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the rhythm of rain outside. It wasn't sad silence, more like a pause between breaths. Clara stared at the harbor, where boats swayed gently against their ropes. She imagined what it would feel like to step onto one, to drift somewhere new. In her inbox, the message sat quietly sent but unanswered, floating through digital space toward an office 38 floors above the city. Somewhere, on that floor, a man known for his silence and storms would soon read her name for the first time. But for now, in a small cafe by the sea, a woman with $12 and a stubborn heart took another sip of coffee, unaware that her life had just begun to shift. The apartment was small and half-lit, the kind of space where silence felt heavier than noise. A single lamp threw a pool of warm light over the cluttered table where Clara sat, surrounded by unopened mail, coffee mugs, and a laptop that buzzed softly like a tired companion. Outside, the harbor wind pressed against the window. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a sheen on the glass that caught the city lights like distant stars. Clara's eyes stung from staring at the screen too long. The job posting for Hawthorne Enterprises was still open. She had read it at least 10 times, maybe more. Each time, it looked both ridiculous and strangely possible. Executive assistant to CEO Ethan Hawthorne, she whispered under her breath, testing the name like it might bite. Everyone knew who he was, the man who made millionaires nervous, who fired people faster than most ordered coffee. Maggie had called him the devil in a 3-piece suit. Clara believed it. She rubbed her temples, glancing at the nearly empty wallet lying beside the keyboard. Inside, one crumpled dollar bill and a faded receipt from the grocery store. She pressed her lips together, breathing out slowly. "Okay," she murmured. "What's the worst that could happen?" The clock ticked once, loud in the quiet room. Her laptop cursor blinked on the blank document. For a long while, nothing moved, just that soft blinking like a heartbeat waiting for courage. Then she began to type, "Dear hiring manager." Her fingers hesitated. The usual script, "I am highly motivated. I believe I'm the best fit," felt hollow. This wasn't the time to sound perfect. She wasn't perfect. She was tired, but she still had fight left, and maybe that counted for something. So she erased everything and started over. "I don't have every skill you might expect. I've made mistakes, and I learn from them. But I work hard. I stay calm under pressure. And I don't give up even when I probably should." She paused, reading it aloud. Her voice trembled a little, not from fear, but from honesty. For the first time, it sounded like her. Maggie's words from earlier echoed in her mind. Maybe it's not about the job. Maybe it's about proving you still can. So she kept typing, not about her degree or her achievements, but about the small things that made her who she was. How she once stayed up all night to help a coworker meet a deadline. How she found humor even in chaos. How she believed kindness still mattered, even in business. By the time she finished, her coffee had gone cold, and the clock read 1:43 She sat back, rereading the letter. It wasn't polished. It wasn't professional by corporate standards. But it was real. Her finger hovered over the send button. Her heart thudded once, twice. Then she clicked. The sound was soft, just a small click, but it felt like the world shifted an inch. Clara leaned back, exhaling through a shaky smile. There. It's done. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the soft rhythm of rain starting again outside. She looked at her reflection in the dark laptop screen, messy bun, tired eyes, but something alive behind them. "Maybe I'm out of my mind," she whispered, "but maybe I'm not." She closed the laptop and stood, stretching her arms. Her body ached from too many hours of waiting for luck, for validation, for something to change. But tonight, she had taken the first small step toward it. At the counter, she poured the last of the milk into a glass and took a sip. It tasted a day too old, but she didn't care. She smiled anyway. For a long moment, she stood by the window, watching the lights ripple across the wet pavement. Somewhere out there, high above the skyline, That man, Ethan Hawthorne, probably sat in his perfect office, running his perfect world, and tomorrow, her imperfect application would land right in the middle of it. A faint laugh escaped her lips. "Good luck, Mr. Hawthorne. You won't know what hit you." She turned off the lamp. The room dimmed, wrapped in a soft blue from the city outside. As she slipped into bed, her mind wouldn't quiet. She imagined what it would be like, walking into that office, the cold glass, the sharp suits, the stares, the challenge of being seen, and maybe, for once, being understood. Her heartbeat slowed, sinking with the rain on the window. She didn't pray often anymore, but tonight, she whispered something into the dark, half hope, half promise. "Just give me one chance," she murmured. "I won't waste it." The city outside kept breathing, endless and bright. And somewhere, in another part of that same city, a man who believed he'd seen everything was about to meet the one person who would prove him wrong. The phone started ringing just as Clara was pouring hot water into her mug. The sound startled her, cutting through the quiet of her small apartment. She glanced at the clock on the wall, 9:12 a.m. Too early for telemarketers, too late for bad news, she hoped. She wiped her hands on her robe and picked up the phone, her voice still heavy with sleep. "Hello, Ms. Bennett," a crisp female voice said. "This is Linda Harris from Hawthorne Enterprises." Clara froze. The mug in her hand tilted slightly, spilling a few drops onto her wrist. The sting jolted her awake. Yes, this is she." She managed. "I'm calling regarding your application for the executive assistant position." There was a pause just long enough for Clara's heart to start pounding. "Mr. Hawthorne would like to meet you for an interview this afternoon, 3 p.m. at our downtown headquarters." For a moment, words refused to come out. She almost laughed or screamed or both. "This afternoon? Yes. Does that work for you?" Clara looked around the room at her messy table, her laptop, the half-empty cereal bowl, and the cat sleeping upside down on the couch. "Yes," she said quickly, trying to sound composed. "Of course. Absolutely. Good." Linda said, "Please bring a printed resume and identification. Dress appropriately. Reception will guide you." Then came the sound of a polite click, the call ending as neatly as it began. Clara stood there for a long second, phone still in hand, steam curling from her mug. Then she finally whispered, "Oh my God." Her cat, Oliver, blinked sleepily at her from the couch. Unimpressed. Ethan Hawthorne, she said to no one in particular. "The man who terrifies half of Seattle just invited me into his lair." Her heart raced, half fear, half disbelief. She looked down at her pajamas, a faded flannel shirt with cartoon ducks. Definitely not interview material. She set the mug down, pulled her hair into a messy bun, and started pacing. "Okay, think. Clara, you've got, 6 hours. You can do this." She opened her closet, a depressing landscape of worn jeans, cardigans, and one black dress from her cousin's wedding 3 years ago. It had a coffee stain on the sleeve. She groaned. "Maggie," she said suddenly, grabbing her phone again. Her friend answered on the second ring. "You sound like someone who just found a spider or won the lottery." "Neither. Worse. Better. I don't know." Clara took a deep breath. They called Hawthorne Enterprises. "I have an interview today." Maggie let out a high-pitched squeal that made Oliver jump. "Are you serious? That's insane. That's oh my God. That's in like a few hours." "I know," Clara said. "I don't even have proper shoes." "Don't panic," Maggie replied, already in problem-solving mode. "Come to the cafe. I'll bring you my navy skirt, my blazer, and those heels you hate but look great in. I can't walk in those heels. You can try. If you can survive Ethan Hawthorne, you can survive 4 inches of pain." Clara laughed nervously. "You really think I should go?" Maggie's tone softened. "Clara, this might be the one. Worst case, it's a story to tell. Best case, who knows?" Clara looked at her reflection in the mirror. Her hair was wild, her eyes puffy from lack of sleep, but beneath that, there was something else, a spark she hadn't seen in a long time. "Okay," she whispered, "let's do this." The hours that followed were a blur of movement, curling her hair, ironing the borrowed blazer, running through practice questions in her head. By noon, her tiny apartment looked like a war zone of clothes and open makeup bags. She stood by the mirror one last time. The navy skirt fit surprisingly well, though the heels felt like torture devices. She dabbed a touch of mascara, then paused, her reflection staring back. "You," she told herself softly, "are going to walk in there and not faint." By the time she left her apartment, the drizzle had stopped. The air smelled faintly of salt and new beginnings. Traffic hummed, steady and loud, as she boarded the bus toward downtown. Every stop felt like a countdown. She imagined what he'd be like, Ethan Hawthorne. Maybe he'd be tall, cold, with a voice that could freeze time. Maybe he'd barely look at her. Maybe he'd hate her the second she tripped on the carpet. She almost laughed out loud at the thought. "At least I'll go down in flames with style," she murmured. When the bus finally turned onto Fifth Avenue, she caught her first glimpse of the Hawthorne Tower. It rose above the skyline's sleek glass, silver edges, sunlight glinting off every window. It looked more like a monument than a building. Her stomach twisted, but she didn't look away. She checked her phone, 2:37 p. Okay, she whispered. No turning back now. The bus hissed to a stop, and she stepped off, clutching her folder like a lifeline. The building's revolving doors reflected her image, small, nervous, but determined. She adjusted her blazer, took a deep breath, and walked inside. The lobby was all marble and glass, the air cool and faintly scented with cedar. Every sound seemed to echo the click of heels, the soft hum of conversation, the muted chime of the elevator. She approached the front desk, heart racing. "Hi, Clara Bennett. I have an interview with Mr. Hawthorne at 3. The receptionist glanced up, professional smile in place. "Yes, Ms. Bennett. They're expecting you. 38th floor?" Clara's pulse quickened. "Thank you." She stepped into the elevator. The doors closed with a quiet sigh. The numbers began to climb, 5, 12, 19, 27. By the time they reached 38, her palms were damp, her throat dry. She smoothed her skirt, took one last deep breath, and whispered, "You've got this." The elevator doors opened. A hallway stretched before her, silent, pristine, and somehow colder than she'd imagined. At the far end, through a glass wall, she could just make out the outline of a man standing by the window, hands in his pockets, framed by the city below. She didn't know yet that this was the moment everything in her life, every failure, every late night, every small act of stubborn hope had been leading to. For now, she just stepped forward, her heels clicking softly on the polished floor, each step echoing closer toward fate. The elevator chimed softly. Clara's reflection in the silver doors looked calmer than she felt. Inside, her heart was doing somersaults, each beat louder than the last. She tightened her grip on the folder in her hands and stepped forward. The polished floor of the 38th floor caught the light smooth, perfect, intimidating. Her borrowed heels clicked too loudly. She winced. "Don't trip," she whispered to herself. "Whatever you do, don't trip." The universe, of course, had other plans. As the elevator doors slid shut behind her, Clara tried to adjust her footing. The right heel wobbled. She stumbled forward just slightly, and in that same heartbeat, someone turned the corner, carrying a cup of coffee. The collision was instant. The splash was spectacular. Hot coffee arced through the air, landing squarely on the lapel of a perfectly pressed gray suit. The man holding it froze. Clara froze. Time froze. "Oh my God," she gasped, dropping her folder and clutching a napkin from her bag. "I'm so sorry I didn't see you there. Oh no. Your jacket?" The man didn't move. He just stared at her. When she looked up, her breath caught, his face, that face, sharp, controlled. unreadable like it had been carved out of the same glass that surrounded them. Ethan Hawthorne. Of course, of all people. Her brain screamed at her to say something. Anything. Instead, she just held the soggy napkin like a peace offering. It's, mostly on the lapel. That's good, right? I mean, better than on your, face. A muscle in his jaw moved slowly. He glanced down at the spreading stain on his sleeve, then back at her. His voice was low, quiet, and colder than she expected. You must be the applicant. Her eyes widened. You know that you're the only one scheduled for 3 he said evenly, and the only one currently throwing coffee at me. If embarrassment could kill, she'd have dropped right there on the marble floor. I am so sorry, she stammered. I was just nervous. And these shoes they're murder weapons, honestly. And stop. The word was calm, but final, like a door closing. Clara froze again, the napkin still halfway in the air. Ethan looked down at his jacket, then sighed not dramatically, just tiredly. The kind of sigh that carried years of frustration condensed into one quiet exhale. He took the napkin from her hand, dabbed once at his sleeve, and said, "Follow me." Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. "Wait, you're still going to interview me?" He didn't answer, just started walking. Clara scrambled to gather her folder, her bag, her dignity. She followed him down the hall, the sound of her heels echoing like tiny apologies. He moved with precision, each step measured. She moved like a wind-up toy that had missed a beat. They passed rows of glass offices where people pretended not to stare. Clara caught a glimpse of herself reflected in the walls, a small woman in an oversized blazer, chasing after a man who probably scared entire boardrooms into silence. When they reached his office, Ethan held the door open just enough for her to enter. His desk was immaculate, every pen aligned, every document stacked like a monument to order. "Sit," he said simply. Clara obeyed, perching at the edge of the leather chair like it might eject her at any moment. Ethan moved behind the desk, removing his jacket and hanging it neatly on a stand. The stain, she noticed, had spread across the shoulder, a dark patch against gray wool. He caught her staring. "I have others," he said dryly, her cheeks flushed. "Right. Of course you do." You... His brow twitched. "I'm what?" She exhaled, forcing a laugh that came out wrong. "You're very prepared, organized. You probably have backup suits for your backup suits." For a brief, impossible second, something flickered across his expression. Not a smile exactly, but the faintest hint of surprise. He opened a folder. Clara Bennett, bachelor's in journalism, previous employment copy editor, freelance writer. "Yes," she said quickly, hands clasped tight. "I'm great with words. And coffee, apparently." He looked up, his gaze steady. "Why apply for this position?" "It's not in your field." Clara hesitated. The easy answer was money. But the truth was harder to say out loud. "I needed a chance," she said softly. "Something steady. Something that forces me to show up again." He studied her for a long time, long enough for her to start doubting every word. Then, without looking away, he asked, "Do you always talk this much when you're nervous?" She blinked. "Oh, is it that obvious?" "Yes." She winced. "I can fix that. I doubt it." That might have been the moment another applicant would have crumbled. But something about the way he said it, calm, matter of fact, almost like a test, made her straighten her back. "Well," she said, meeting his eyes, "then it's a good thing I'm not afraid of impossible tasks." Silence filled the room again. For the first time, Ethan looked at her differently, not with annoyance, but with a kind of quiet assessment, like he'd found something unexpected and wasn't sure what to do with it. He closed the folder slowly. "Interesting," he said finally. "Let's see how long that lasts." She swallowed. "Is that a yes?" He didn't answer right away, just looked at the coffee stain drying on his sleeve, then back at her. "Monday." Ada, don't be late. Clara blinked. Clara. Wait, you're hiring me? Ethan stood, already reaching for a clean jacket. You survived 5 minutes with me. That's longer than most. She stared, unsure if she should thank him or apologize again. Okay. Monday. Got it. And sorry. Again. For the caffeine assault. He glanced over, his tone unreadable. Next time, just bring it in a cup. Clara managed a nervous smile. Deal. As she turned to leave, her reflection flashed in the glass wall, flustered, hopeful, a little stunned. The elevator doors closed behind her with a soft ding, sealing the moment away. And for the first time in years, Ethan Hawthorne found himself standing in his office, staring at the faint brown stain on his jacket and realizing he didn't quite mind it. The air in Ethan Hawthorne's office was too still, too precise, like everything inside it had learned not to move without permission. The city glimmered behind him, framed perfectly by floor-to-ceiling windows. Clara sat opposite him, her knees pressed together, hands gripping the folder in her lap like it might save her life. Ethan stood by the window at first, saying nothing. The light caught the edge of his suit, the line of his shoulders controlled, deliberate. He didn't look at her yet, just stared out over Seattle, where the sky hung heavy and gray. Sit, he said finally, though she was already sitting. His tone made her straighten anyway. He turned, his eyes landing on her for the first time, sharp, calm, and unreadable. It felt like standing too close to lightning. So, he said, voice even. You're the one who almost set me on fire today. Clara tried to smile, but it wobbled halfway. That's one way to stand out, right? One eyebrow lifted slightly, not amusement, more like surprise that she'd dared to make a joke. Not the kind of impression I usually encourage. She swallowed, noted. He gestured toward the folder she held. Resume. She passed it across the desk, her fingers brushing the edge of polished wood. He didn't thank her, just opened it, scanning quickly, efficiently, as though the words barely needed his attention. Journalism, he said, editing, freelance work, customer support for 2 months. Part-time in retail. He looked up. You have no administrative experience. Clara nodded once. That's true. Then why apply? Her throat tightened, but she made herself meet his eyes. Because every other door closed. He said nothing, just waited. And because, she added, her voice smaller now, I need something that challenges me, something that doesn't let me quit. His eyes flickered slightly, as if measuring the weight of her words. You'll find plenty of challenge here. I can handle it. You think so? I know so, she said, surprising even herself. A pause, long enough for her heartbeat to start pounding in her ears. He closed the folder, setting it aside with a quiet thud. Confidence is cheap, Ms. Bennett. Everyone who walks in here says they can handle it. None of them last. Clara hesitated, then smiled faintly. Maybe that's because they were afraid of you. That earned her another look, sharp, but curious. And you're not. Her voice trembled, but she didn't let it break. Terrified, she said honestly. But fear doesn't mean I'll run. It just means I'll work harder. Ethan's jaw tightened, and for a second, the silence between them changed. Not cold anymore, just quieter. He leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on the desk. Tell me something, he said. Why should I hire you out of every person who's more qualified, more experienced, and less likely to spill coffee on my suit? Clara's fingers twisted the hem of her skirt. Her brain offered a dozen polished answers, all of them hollow. So, she did what she'd done in her letter. She told the truth. Because I'm not perfect, she said softly. But I learn fast. I don't give up. And I'm not afraid of you. His gaze didn't waver. Everyone else's, she continued, her voice growing steadier. They see you as something untouchable, someone impossible to please. Maybe you are, but I've met impossible people before. They're usually just lonely. The air seemed to shift. Ethan's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes flickered, something she couldn't name. "You assume too much," he said finally, but his voice was quieter now. "Maybe," she admitted, "but I'd rather assume something human than something monstrous." For a long while, he didn't respond. The clock on the wall ticked soft, deliberate, unhurried. Then Ethan stood, moving to the window again. The city lights reflected faintly in the glass, scattering across his face. When he spoke, his voice had lost its edge. "You know what this job requires, Ms. Bennett." "I can guess," she said. "No," he replied. "You can't. It means early mornings, late nights, deadlines that don't care if you're tired. It means dealing with me when I'm not in the mood to be dealt with. It means precision, no mistakes. Ever." Clara nodded, her palms damp against her knees. "Then I'll learn to be precise." He looked at her, really looked at her now, not just another name on paper, not just another temporary face. There was something in the way she sat tense but unbroken that caught him off guard. Finally, he said, "Monday, 8, don't be late." For a second, she thought she'd misheard. "Wait, that's it. So, I'm hired." The word landed like a small thunderclap. Clara blinked, then let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Thank you, Mr. Hawthorne." "I won't." "Don't thank me," he interrupted. "Just do the job." She nodded quickly, rising from the chair. Her knees felt weak, her heart still racing. Ethan turned away, already reaching for another file. "Linda will handle the paperwork. You'll start on Monday." Clara hesitated at the door. She wanted to say something light, or grateful, or maybe just human. But instead, she said, "You'll get used to me, Mr. Hawthorne." That made him pause, just for a heartbeat. Then, without turning, he replied, "We'll see." She smiled faintly as she stepped out of his office, the door closing behind her with a soft click. Out in the hallway, she exhaled a mix of disbelief and relief. She leaned against the cool glass wall, staring down at the city far below. The rain had stopped. Sunlight broke through the clouds, faint and golden, scattering across the skyline. For the first time in a long while, Clara felt something she hadn't dared to feel. Hope. The morning sky over Seattle was pale silver when Clara stepped off the elevator, clutching her notebook like a lifeline. The digital clock above the reception desk read 7:52 a.m., 8 minutes early. Good. She'd promised herself she wouldn't be late on her first day not with him. Her heart thudded softly, in rhythm with her heels. The air on the 38th floor was crisp, cool, almost too quiet. She could hear her own breathing. Everything gleamed: the marble floors, the glass partitions, the brushed steel accents. It smelled faintly of cedar and coffee. Linda Harris appeared from a side office, holding a clipboard and a steaming cup. Her smile was the kind that didn't quite reach her eyes, warm enough to guide you, tired enough to warn you. "Clara Bennett," she said, offering a handshake. "Welcome to the top floor. You survived the interview, which already puts you ahead of most." Clara laughed nervously. "That's comforting," Linda motioned for her to follow. "Come, let's go over a few things before the storm hits." They walked past glass doors with gold-etched names, down a corridor that seemed to stretch forever. Clara caught fragments of whispered conversations, the low hum of printers, the steady rhythm of a company waking up. Linda's voice was steady, rehearsed the voice of someone who'd given this tour too many times. "Mr. Hawthorne likes his coffee black. 1 teaspoon of sugar, never more. He has breakfast meetings most mornings, so keep your schedule open from 7 to 9. You'll handle correspondence, calls, travel arrangements, and anything he decides to throw your way." Clara nodded, scribbling notes. Linda stopped, turning to face her, and a few things not to do. Her tone softened, but the weight behind it didn't. "Don't interrupt him unless it's urgent. Don't guess if you don't know something. Ask. Don't take it personally if he ignores you. That's his version of politeness. And above all, don't ever be late. Clara smiled faintly. He mentioned that. Linda's lips curved slightly. Of course he did. They reached a small desk outside Ethan's glass office. It faced the city, breathtaking and intimidating all at once. Linda gestured to it. This will be you. Breathe now while you can. Clara placed her bag down, smoothing her blazer. The clock ticked to 7:59, and, right on cue, the door to the executive elevator slid open. The change in the air was instant. Ethan Hawthorne stepped out. Crisp suit, dark tie, every movement efficient like time itself worked for him. Conversations in nearby offices faltered. Footsteps quieted. Even the hum of the lights seemed to fade. He didn't walk. He arrived. "Good morning, Mr. Hawthorne," Linda said quickly. "Morning," he replied without slowing. His gaze flicked to Clara, brief but sharp. "Bennett." She stood straighter. "Good morning, sir." He nodded once, then said only 2 words. Cool. Controlled. "Follow me." Her heart jumped. She grabbed her notebook and hurried after him, the sound of her heels chasing his long strides. They passed through his office doors, glass and steel and quiet power. Inside, everything was immaculate, not a single item out of place. The walls were lined with shelves of awards and minimalist art, the desk spotless except for a single pen, a laptop, and the faint smell of coffee. Ethan stopped near the window. "Sit." She obeyed, folding her hands in her lap. He didn't look at her right away. "Do you know why most people quit this job?" Clara shook her head. "No, sir." "Because they try to keep up," he said, finally turning toward her. Instead of thinking ahead, he studied her face for a moment, the corner of his mouth lifting not a smile. Exactly. Just a small acknowledgement that she was still standing. "You'll learn the difference." "Yes, sir." "Good. You'll start with the Langford project files. I want them reorganized by department, deadline, and projected cost. There's a digital and a physical set. Both are a mess. I expect it done before lunch." Her pulse jumped. "Before lunch?" "Got it." He glanced at her notebook. "You take notes? That's good. You'll need them." As he turned to his desk, she exhaled quietly. The morning unfolded in a blur of clicking keys and paper rustling. Clara buried herself in folders stacked higher than her forearm, color-coding, cross-checking, trying not to think about the man sitting just 10 feet away, silent, focused, untouchable. Every so often, she'd steal a glance. His concentration was almost unnerving, the way he scanned a report, made a call, signed a document, all without wasting a movement. She thought, he's not cold. He's just sealed. By 10, her shoulders ached. By 11, she'd caught 3 major errors in the spreadsheets. By 11:30, her stomach grumbled softly. She looked up to find Ethan watching her, not glaring, just observing, like he was waiting to see whether she'd crack. She straightened. "Almost done, sir." He nodded once. "Good. Bring it to me when you finish." At 11:52, she placed the final file on his desk, her hands trembling slightly, all organized by category, deadline and cost variance. I flagged discrepancies in red. He flipped through the pages, his eyes scanning every detail. Then he stopped, looked up. "You found the accounting error?" "Yes." "Section 3, page 9. He leaned back slightly, one brow raised. "How long did that take you?" "About 4 hours," she said. He glanced at the clock. "You've been here for 3. Clara froze. "Oh, then 3. The corner of his mouth shifted again, almost imperceptibly. "Noted." She blinked. "Is that good or bad?" Ethan returned his gaze to the papers. "Efficient?" She smiled, more from relief than pride. "Thank you." He closed the folder with a quiet click. "We'll see how long that lasts." There it was, the Hawthorne test. But this time, Instead of shrinking, Clara smiled a little wider. "I'll surprise you." He looked up again, his eyes meeting hers for a brief second. Something passed between them, not warmth, not yet, but a flicker of something alive. Outside, the rain had started again, soft against the glass. Ethan returned to his work. Clara returned to hers. And for the first time since he'd built his empire, the 38th floor didn't feel entirely frozen. The first real test came sooner than Clara expected. It was still early enough that the city below was wrapped in fog, the kind that made everything seem hushed and half asleep. But on the 38th floor, time moved differently. It was precise, sharpened, waiting for no one. Ethan stood at the head of his desk, flipping through a thick stack of documents. His expression never changed, but the small tightening around his mouth said enough someone, somewhere, had made mistakes. And now those mistakes were hers to fix. He set the pile in front of her with a quiet thud. Langford Project, review, organize, correct any errors. Before lunch, Clara blinked. All of it. Before lunch, his gaze was steady, cool. Was I unclear? She swallowed hard. "No, sir, not unclear, just ambitious." "Good," he said, turning back to his computer. "Ambition's useful. Panic isn't." That was it. No encouragement, no explanation, just the challenge dropped like a gauntlet between them. She pulled the pile closer, feeling its weight. Hundreds of pages, budgets, reports, notes scribbled in margins. Everything smelled faintly of ink and coffee. She opened the first folder, chaos, numbers that didn't line up, memos missing dates, handwriting she could barely read. Somewhere beneath it all, there was logic. She just had to dig it out. She rolled up her sleeves, took a deep breath, and started. The office was quiet except for the soft shuffle of paper and the muted click of keys from Ethan's desk. Every now and then, she'd glance up, half expecting him to look over. But he never did. His attention was elsewhere, a call, an email, a decision that could move markets. Clara focused harder. She sorted by date first, then by department, marking corrections in neat red strokes. The numbers began to tell a story, missed deadlines, wrong totals, little cracks in a project that was supposed to be flawless. After an hour, her hand ached. After 2, she'd lost feeling in her shoulders. But she kept going, her determination steady, quiet, stubborn. At one point, Ethan's voice broke the silence. "Coffee." She looked up, startled. "Sorry." He gestured toward the side counter. "You're allowed to have some. It's not a monastery." Her cheeks warmed. "Right. Thank you." She poured a cup, black, no sugar, just how Linda had described his. She took one cautious sip and nearly winced. Bitter, strong, the kind of coffee that didn't invite comfort, just endurance. It fit the room perfectly. Back at her desk, she pressed on. By 11:30, she'd caught an entire column of misplaced figures that threw off the project's profit margin by almost 2%. She recalculated everything, her fingers flying across the calculator, erasing, rewriting, checking twice. Her mind buzzed with concentration. Somewhere deep down, beneath the nerves and caffeine, she realized something strange. She was enjoying this. The puzzle of it, the order hidden in the mess. For the first time in months, she felt capable again. Useful. At 11:57, she placed the completed stack on his desk. Her hands were slightly ink-stained, her pulse quick but steady. Done. Ethan didn't look up right away. "Before lunch," he said flatly, as if testing her claim. "Yes," she replied, trying to sound calm. "You said before lunch." Finally. He looked up, eyes flicking from her to the stack of files. He opened the top folder, scanning silently. A few minutes passed. The clock on the wall ticked toward noon. Then, very quietly, he said, "You found the cost variance in Section 9. She nodded. It didn't add up. The subcontractor invoices were off by about 12 grand. He turned a page. "And you recalculated everything." "Yes." Twice. Another pause. Then, something she hadn't seen before, the faintest curve at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile, but close enough to make her heart skip. Efficient, he murmured. Clara blinked. Thank you. I think he closed the folder. You think correctly? Silence stretched again, but it felt different this time. Not cold, not sharp, just quieter. Ethan leaned back in his chair, studying her. How long did it take? 3 hours, she said. 3. He arched an eyebrow. Not 4. She hesitated, realizing he remembered what she'd said during the interview. No, sir. 3 exactly. He nodded, a flicker of something thoughtful passing behind his eyes. Most people would have given up halfway. Most people haven't had rent due next week, she said before she could stop herself. He glanced up, surprised. Then, unexpectedly, a small sound escaped him, something like a quiet breath of amusement. Honest? That's new. She shrugged, smiling faintly. Honesty's cheaper than pretense. The words hung in the air between them, light, unguarded, completely unplanned, and for just a heartbeat. She thought she saw his shoulders ease, the tension soften. He stood, gathering the files. Good work. Bennett, you start again after lunch. Of course, she said quickly, rising to her feet. He turned to the window, his voice almost an afterthought. And Bennett? Yes. Sir? He didn't face her when he said it. Don't call me sir every other sentence. It's exhausting. She smiled. Okay. Mr. Hawthorne? Still exhausting. Clara bit back a laugh, nodding instead. Got it. When she left the office, her heart was lighter than it had been in a long time. The hallway seemed brighter, the silence less intimidating. She walked past the reflection of herself in the glass-tired eyes, messy hair, ink-stained fingers, and smiled at the woman staring back. She had survived her first test, and somewhere deep inside that fortress of glass and silence, she might have left a small crack. By the time the clock struck noon, the 38th floor had quieted into that strange, suspended calm that came between meetings and meals. Most of the staff had already disappeared down to the cafe below. The scent of roasted coffee and paper still hung faintly in the air. Clara stayed at her desk, pretending to check emails while her stomach reminded her she hadn't eaten since dawn. She could hear Ethan pacing behind the frosted glass of his office, steady and deliberate. Then the door opened. Bennett. His tone, clipped but even, still made her jump a little. She turned in her chair. Yes, Mr. Hawthorne. He held the Langford folder in one hand. The pages fanned out neatly. His expression was unreadable. Come in, he said. She wiped her palms on her skirt, heart quickening, and followed him inside. The office smelled faintly of cedar polish and rain. The light from the windows caught the gray of his suit, the sharp line of his jaw. He sat, flipping through the file again. How many errors did you find? He asked, eyes still on the pages. Clara hesitated. About 24, maybe more. He stopped, looking up. 24. Yes. Sir? Most of them were small, but the subcontractor numbers, those could have caused a serious discrepancy. Ethan's gaze lingered on her face, as if recalibrating something he'd assumed about her. You discovered all this in... How long? She drew a quiet breath. 1 hour to find them. 3 hours to fix them. There was a pause, the kind that stretched out just long enough to make her doubt herself. Then, unexpectedly, the edge of his mouth softened. Good work, he said simply. The words were plain, unembellished, but to Clara, they landed like sunlight breaking through fog. Thank you, she said, voice quieter than she intended. He closed the folder carefully, tapping its corner against the desk to align the pages. You caught things that the finance team missed. Twice? That's flattering, she replied, unsure whether to smile. It's not flattery, he said, his tone steady but not unkind. It's observation. She nodded, trying not to look too pleased. But the warmth crept in anyway, small, slow, spreading. Ethan leaned back in his chair. "You're methodical. That's rare these days. Most people rush." Clara smiled softly. "Rushing is how I broke a printer last year." That caught him off guard. One eyebrow rose. "You broke a printer with a stapler," she said before she could stop herself. He blinked. "That's one way to troubleshoot." She laughed, the sound light, almost musical. In my defense, it wouldn't stop beeping. And there, just for a moment, he smiled. A small, quick curve that didn't quite reach his eyes, but softened everything about him. "Let's hope you treat my office equipment with more restraint," he said quietly. "I'll do my best." Silence followed, but it wasn't heavy this time. It felt like the air between them had shifted less like stone, more like water. Ethan glanced out the window for a moment, his tone changing. "Quieter now? You know, people tend to underestimate this job." Clara tilted her head. "How so?" "They think it's paperwork, schedules, coffee orders." He paused. "It's not. It's reading people, predicting moves before they happen, anticipating chaos." She thought for a moment, then said softly, "Maybe that's why everyone quits." He looked back at her, surprised again she was getting good at that. "Maybe," he said, "or maybe they just don't like mirrors." The way he said it made something tighten in her chest. For a brief instant, she saw it, the exhaustion behind his precision, the loneliness behind the discipline. He lived in a tower made of glass, but somehow, he was the one trapped inside. Clara wanted to ask something then, something human, something kind. But the moment passed. He was already turning the page, voice steady again. "Linda will send you the files for the upcoming board meeting," he said. "You'll organize the agenda and prep the talking points for the executives. I'll review it with you tomorrow. Yes, Mr. Hawthorne?" He looked up again, his tone softer. "And Bennett. Good job." She blinked, caught off guard. "Thank you." He nodded once, then returned his gaze to the papers, already shifting back into work mode. But the faint smile, the one that had surprised her, lingered a second longer than before. Clara stepped out of his office, closing the door gently behind her. Out in the hallway, the light seemed warmer. She let out a slow breath, one she didn't know she'd been holding. Linda passed by, raising an eyebrow. "He didn't bite your head off. I see." Clara smiled. "Not today." "Then congratulations," Linda said dryly. "You're officially the first person in a year to survive a full morning with him." Clara chuckled. "Should I get a badge for that?" Linda's grin softened. "Honey, around here, that is a badge." Clara sat back at her desk, the hum of the office wrapping around her like white noise. She glanced at the clock, barely past noon. Outside, the rain had eased into a drizzle, the clouds parting just enough for a strip of sunlight to slide through the windows and rest on her papers. For the first time since she started, the 38th floor didn't feel cold. Inside Ethan's office, he stood by the window again, looking out over the skyline. The Langford folder sat closed on his desk, neat and perfect, but his eyes weren't on it. They were somewhere else, distant, thoughtful. He caught his reflection in the glass. The faintest trace of a smile ghosted across it. "Good work, Bennett," he murmured again, almost to himself. And down the hall, Clara smiled without knowing why, as if somehow she'd felt it. 3 weeks passed, and something unspoken began to change on the 38th floor of Hawthorne Enterprises. It started quietly, the way spring creeps into a city tired of gray. A laugh where there hadn't been one. The clinking of cups instead of the stiff silence of keyboards. The kind of stillness that didn't feel heavy anymore, just calm. People noticed first in small ways. The receptionist on the 38th floor stopped dreading the elevator ping that announced Ethan Hawthorne's arrival. The assistants down the hall started greeting one another instead of whispering about who'd get fired next. Even the office plants, the ones that had always seemed doomed under the harsh fluorescent light, somehow looked greener. And at the center of it all was Clara Bennett. She came in each morning 5 minutes early, hair tied up loosely, a mug of her own mismatched coffee cup in hand. She moved through the day like she was part of the building's rhythm, not fighting it, just gently reshaping it. She learned the pace of Ethan's footsteps, the tone of his voice when he was deep in thought, the exact moment to place a file on his desk before he even asked for it. Sometimes, she'd catch his eye mid-sentence during a meeting and know instantly what he needed to note, a figure, a document, and it would be in his hand before the thought left his mind. The others started whispering, half in awe, half in curiosity. "She's different," someone said by the copier. "She actually likes working with him." Or, "Maybe he likes working with her," another murmured, lowering her voice. Ethan heard none of it. Or maybe he did, but for the first time, he didn't mind. He didn't understand when it happened, but the office felt lighter. His temper, once sharp enough to cut through walls, had dulled into something more measured. He still demanded perfection, but now, when a mistake happened, he didn't lash out. He just breathed, paused, and said quietly, "Let's fix it." It startled everyone the first time. It startled him too. The truth was, Clara had a strange kind of disarming honesty, the kind that didn't challenge him directly, but held a mirror up just enough to make him think. When she smiled, it wasn't out of politeness. It was out of a genuine warmth that softened the edges of even the hardest mornings. She brought small things into the office that didn't belong in a corporate tower. A tiny cactus that sat near her monitor. A jar of lemon drops that everyone pretended not to eat, but always did. A playlist she hummed along to while sorting files, instrumental, calm, something with rain sounds woven in. And somehow, that calm spread. One morning, Linda Harris walked by and stopped short at the sight of Ethan leaning over Clara's desk. Not in irritation, but curiosity. He was pointing at a spreadsheet, something about quarterly projections. Clara was explaining something, using her pen to trace a line across the chart. He was listening, really listening. Linda blinked, whispered to herself, "I've seen everything now," and walked away shaking her head. Inside the office, Clara noticed Ethan's tie was slightly off-center. She hesitated, then said, softly, "You might want to straighten that before your meeting." He looked down, then up again. "You notice everything, don't you?" She smiled, occupational hazard. He almost smiled back, almost. But when he walked away, the tie was straight. By the end of that third week, Clara had become the quiet heartbeat of the floor. When she laughed, others laughed. When she focused, the room followed. She carried an ease that balanced Ethan's relentless drive, a softness that didn't weaken him, but grounded him. And though no one dared say it aloud, they'd all seen it the way his face had changed. Ethan Hawthorne, the man who once ruled his office with glacial precision, now smiled, not often, not fully, but enough for people to notice. Once, after a successful meeting with a notoriously difficult client, Clara handed him a folder, and he said simply, "Good timing." She replied, teasing, "I'm getting good at reading minds." And he'd said, with a tone that almost passed for warmth, "Mine's not easy to read." She'd grinned, "Then I'll just keep trying." He didn't answer, but the ghost of a smile stayed long after she turned away. That afternoon, when the floor had gone quiet, he stood by the window, looking out over Seattle. The sky was streaked with gold and gray. In his reflection, he caught sight of Clara at her desk, hair loose now, tapping her pen against a list of tomorrow's tasks. Something softened in his chest, something unfamiliar. He remembered what she'd said weeks ago, the day she spilled coffee on him. "I'm not perfect, but I don't give up." He'd dismissed it then. Now, he believed it. For the first time in a long time, Ethan felt the world move at a pace that didn't suffocate him. It wasn't control. It wasn't chaos. It was connection. The clock hit 6. Clara gathered her things, slinging her bag over her shoulder. "Heading out," she said from the doorway. He nodded. "See you tomorrow." She lingered just a second longer. "Try not to work all night." He looked up, one brow raised. "And if I do?" Then at least let the coffee machine rest, she said, half smiling. He chuckled quietly, a sound so rare that even she seemed surprised. I'll consider it, he said. As she left, the sound of her laughter faded down the hall, light and genuine. Ethan turned back to the window. The city lights were flickering on, one by one, like stars finding their place. Somewhere between the silence and the sound of her footsteps, the 38th floor, his kingdom of glass and steel, had started to feel human again. The office was never meant to be this quiet, at least, not this late. It was past 10 when Clara noticed the lights still glowing under Ethan's door. Everyone else had long gone, the hum of conversation replaced by the faint buzz of electricity. The 38th floor felt like another world after hours, suspended above the sleeping city, the rain whispering against the windows. She looked down at the paper bag in her hand, a sandwich from the cafe across the street. Still warm, and the cup of black coffee she'd carried up 2 flights of stairs after the elevator stopped for cleaning. She hesitated for a moment outside his door, then knocked softly. "Come in," his voice said, low, tired. Ethan was seated behind his desk, jacket off, sleeves rolled to his elbows. The lamplight caught the sharp lines of his face, softened only by fatigue. Papers surrounded him like snowdrift's blueprints, financial sheets, notes written in his precise, angular handwriting. He didn't look up when she stepped in. "You should have gone home hours ago." Clara smiled faintly. "So should you." He gave a quiet exhale that wasn't quite a laugh. "Someone has to keep this company from falling apart." She set the coffee and sandwich down on the edge of his desk. "Maybe, but you can't do it on caffeine and stubbornness alone." That made him look up. His eyes, under the lamplight, were sharp but tired, the kind of tired that came from years of carrying something heavier than numbers. "You brought me food," he said simply, as if the thought genuinely surprised him. "I figured you'd forget." "I didn't forget," he said automatically, but his stomach's quiet protest proved otherwise. Clara smiled. "Then eat anyway." He studied her for a moment longer, as if trying to decide whether to send her away or accept the gesture. Then, with a sigh, he unwrapped the sandwich. For a while, neither spoke. The only sounds were the faint crinkle of paper and the rain tapping gently at the glass. Clara leaned against the wall, watching him, the golden lamplight drawing soft shadows across the room. "You know," she said quietly, "most people would have left by now." He didn't look up. Most people don't run a company. Most people also don't try to save it alone. That made him pause. The rain seemed to grow louder in the silence that followed. He set the sandwich down, leaned back slightly, and regarded her with that same measured calm. "Alone," he repeated, like testing the weight of the word. "You think I'm alone?" She met his gaze. "Aren't you?" For the first time? He didn't have an immediate reply. The clock on the wall ticked softly, filling the space between them. Ethan's jaw tightened. "People like me don't have the luxury of what?" Clara asked gently. He hesitated. Of slowing down, of trusting, of needing. Clara's voice softened. "Maybe that's not strength. Ethan, maybe it's fear." He looked at her sharply, but there was no anger in it, just surprise. No one talked to him like that. Not here, not ever. She didn't flinch. "You built something incredible. Everyone sees it. But success doesn't mean much if there's no one to share it with." For a long time, he said nothing. His gaze drifted to the skyline outside, 1,000 glittering lights stretching into the distance, each one belonging to someone else's story, someone else's life. His reflection stared back from the glass, composed, controlled, and suddenly, so terribly lonely. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter. "I've never had much time for sharing." Clara smiled faintly, walking closer to the window. "Then maybe you've been keeping time wrong." He turned to look at her. She wasn't mocking him. There was no pity, no performance, just calm, simple truth. For a man who lived by precision, by control, her words hit like a quiet revelation. He exhaled, leaning back, the faintest trace of something softening in his expression. "You're a strange woman, Bennett. I get that a lot." He smiled then, a real one, small, unguarded, quick as breath. It changed his face completely. Clara caught it and looked away, pretending not to notice. "Eat before it gets cold." He nodded, taking another bite, and they stood there in silence again, not awkward, just still. The kind of quiet that didn't demand filling. Minutes passed like that. The rain kept whispering. The city lights flickered far below, reflections dancing across the glass. Ethan glanced up once more, watching her as she gazed out at the skyline. "You really think I've been doing it wrong?" She turned, smiling softly. "Not wrong, just alone." He didn't argue, couldn't. For the first time in years, the fortress he'd built around himself didn't feel invincible. It felt fragile, human. When Clara finally gathered her things to leave, Ethan said quietly, "Thank you." She stopped at the door, half turned toward him. For the sandwich, he shook his head. For staying, her eyes softened. "Get some rest." "Mr. Hawthorne?" "Ethan," he corrected, his voice low. "You can call me Ethan." She smiled. "Good night, Ethan." When the door closed behind her, the room felt different, warmer somehow. Ethan leaned back in his chair, looking at the untouched half of his sandwich, the second cup of coffee hers, still sitting beside his. Outside, the rain began to slow. The city lights blurred behind the misted glass. And for the first time in years, Ethan Hawthorne didn't feel entirely alone in his own empire. The meeting had ended hours ago, but the energy still lingered, that rare kind of satisfaction that comes after everything goes exactly as it should. The boardroom had been quiet when Ethan spoke, confident, measured, every word landing precisely where it needed to. When it was over, hands were shaken, compliments exchanged, but through it all, his eyes had drifted once to where Clara stood by the door, watching him with quiet pride. Now. The city lights shimmered across Lake Union, reflected like threads of gold in the dark water. Clara sat across from him at a small table by the window of a lakeside restaurant. The kind of place where people spoke in low tones, where candles flickered in crystal glasses, and where time for once felt unhurried. "This isn't a work dinner," Ethan said after the waiter left. She smiled softly. "I noticed." He looked almost uncomfortable admitting it. "I thought it might be appropriate. After today." She tilted her head, teasing gently. "Appropriate. That's a very romantic word choice. Mr. Hawthorne?" He gave a quiet laugh, small but genuine. "You're impossible. I've been told." They shared a look, one that said more than either dared to speak. When the food arrived, salmon grilled with lemon and rosemary. A simple red wine they ate mostly in silence at first, the kind that didn't press or demand, just allowed the air between them to breathe. Outside, a boat drifted lazily past the docks, its reflection trailing like liquid light. It was Ethan who broke the stillness. "I grew up about 40 miles from here," he said, his voice softer now. "Small town, cold winters. My father ran a construction company. He built things the old way, with calloused hands and no patience for mistakes." Clara set down her fork, listening. "He wanted me to be like him." Ethan continued, hard, focused, unbreakable. "My mother, she was different. She used to say there was strength in kindness. I didn't understand that until she died." Clara didn't speak. She didn't have to. He looked down at his glass, turning it slowly between his fingers. After she was gone, the house went silent. My father and I barely spoke. When I left for college, he didn't even come to the train station, just said, "Don't fail." A quiet stretched out long, deep, almost sacred. The candle flickered, catching the reflection in his eyes. She asked gently, "Do you still talk to him?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "Not for years." why he hesitated. Because I became him. That confession hung in the air like a fragile truth, delicate and raw. Clara's heart ached. She reached across the table, her hand stopping just shy of his. Maybe that's not the whole story, she said softly. Maybe you became what you needed to survive, but that doesn't mean that's all you are. He looked up then, and in that moment, the armor he always wore slipped just enough for her to see the man beneath it. Not the CEO, not the strategist, not the legend whispered about in office halls, just Ethan human, tired, and quietly longing for something he didn't yet know how to name. You think so, he asked. She nodded. I think strength can come from pain, but it doesn't have to stay there. Sometimes it can turn into grace. He watched her, eyes steady, unreadable. Then slowly he smiled, a small, grateful thing, almost unsure of itself. Grace, he repeated softly, as if testing the word. That's not a word people use with me often. They should, Clara said simply. The sound of soft jazz drifted through the restaurant. For a while, they sat there without words, letting the quiet speak for them, the kind of quiet that felt safe. Ethan glanced out the window again. I don't remember the last time I sat down to dinner like this, he admitted. With someone. You mean, she asked. He nodded. Then it's long overdue, she said. There was warmth in her tone, not pity, not flattery, just kindness, the kind his mother might have spoken with. He studied her again, noticing the way the candlelight traced her features soft, honest, without pretense. You make things simple, he said quietly. Even when they're not. She smiled. It's a gift. He laughed again, quietly, shaking his head. I can see that. When the waiter came to refill their glasses, neither noticed. The night outside stretched deep and wide, the lake reflecting the lights of the city like scattered memories. For a man who had built his world around precision, Ethan realized something strange sitting here. He didn't feel the need to control anything. Not the conversation, not the moment, not even himself. As the plates were cleared, Clara leaned forward slightly, her voice gentle. Maybe that's why you're strong, she said, because you've carried so much and still kept going. He looked at her for a long moment, something flickering in his expression. Then, almost in a whisper, he said, or maybe it just made me lonely. Her hand reached across the table then, this time resting lightly over his. Her touch was warm, steady. Maybe it's both, she said, strong and lonely. But they don't have to stay together forever. He didn't move, didn't pull away, just stared at their hands, hers small and steady, his rough from years of holding on too tightly. The restaurant faded into a blur around them, the hum of quiet laughter, the clinking of silverware, the rhythm of a song that seemed to stretch just for them. And when he finally looked up again, the softness in his eyes said what words couldn't. Outside, the last light of the evening settled gently across the lake, and in that calm reflection, something shifted. The distance between two people, one made of walls, the other of warmth, quietly began to disappear. They stepped out of the restaurant into the cool night air. The city had quieted into that soft, gentle hum that only came after 10 when the rush was gone and the world felt slower, closer. The lake shimmered behind them, its surface catching bits of golden light from passing cars. Ethan walked beside Clara, hands tucked into his coat pockets. He wasn't used to silence feeling this easy. For most of his life, silence had meant tension, unfinished work, or something broken. But tonight, it just felt calm. Clara glanced at him, her breath making small clouds in the chilly air. You always walk this slow after dinner. He smiled faintly. Only when I don't want the night to end. She looked ahead, pretending not to smile, though her heart warmed at the words. Careful, she said lightly. That almost sounded sentimental. I'm trying to get used to it. They walked on. The sidewalk glistened faintly from the earlier rain, puddles reflecting streaks of light from shop signs and passing cars. For a man who had built a life on certainty, Ethan looked strangely at peace. His shoulders were looser, his eyes softer. After a while, he said quietly, "You know, I used to hate nights like this. Why, they remind me of the space between things, between meetings, between days, between people." Clara slowed her pace, and now he looked at her, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Now it feels like the space where things begin. For a few seconds, she couldn't find words. The streetlight ahead flickered softly, throwing long shadows over the sidewalk. Her heart thudded once, deep and deliberate. They stopped at a crosswalk, waiting for the light to change. Ethan turned slightly toward her, his voice low, almost uncertain. "You've done something I didn't think was possible." She raised an eyebrow, teasing gently. "Got you to eat dinner at a normal hour." He laughed, shaking his head. "No, you've made me remember who I was, before all this, before the titles, before the walls." Her expression softened. "And who was that? A boy who thought kindness made people weak." Clara looked at him. Really looked. The man who once terrified an entire floor now stood under a streetlight, eyes unguarded, voice stripped of the weight he used to wear like armor. Maybe that boy just needed someone to show him it didn't, she said softly. He smiled then, slow, genuine, and just a little sad. "Maybe that someone was you." The crosswalk light blinked green, but neither of them moved. Ethan's voice dropped lower. "Clara." Her name and his tone sounded different, tender, hesitant, almost reverent. She met his eyes, steady. "Yes." He hesitated, searching for words. "You make it easy to breathe, to care, to feel again." She felt something catch in her chest, something both heavy and light. For a moment, neither spoke. The sound of the city faded into the background, leaving only their quiet, shared stillness. Finally, she whispered, "You make it easy too." They stood there for a long time, two people caught in the quiet gravity of understanding, of something that didn't need defining. When they finally started walking again, the distance between them was smaller. His hand brushed hers once, barely a touch, but it lingered in the air like a promise. "Ethan," she said softly, eyes still ahead, "you don't always have to be strong." He turned to her, "And if I fall apart," she smiled, "then I'll remind you how to build again." Gently this time. He didn't respond, but his silence was filled with everything words could never hold. They reached her car, parked under a flickering street lamp. She turned to face him, her hair catching a faint glimmer of light. "Thank you for tonight." "It's me who should thank you," he said. "You reminded me what it's like to stop running." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Then don't start again." He smiled, quiet, tired, beautiful. "I'll try not to." For a moment, they just stood there. The city around them seemed to fade, just the two of them and the hum of the night. Then, almost without thinking, Ethan stepped closer. He didn't touch her, not yet, but his gaze held hers, steady, searching. "You said once that success doesn't mean anything if you can't share it with someone," he murmured. "You were right." Clara's lips curved gently. "I usually am." He laughed, soft and breathy. Then his expression turned serious again, eyes tracing hers as if memorizing them. "Clara," he said quietly, "you've changed me. You make me remember that I used to want to be good." She reached out, her fingers brushing his sleeve. "You already are." The air between them felt electric, not with tension, but with quiet truth. And then, under the soft halo of the streetlight, he whispered, "You make me remember who I used to be." Her smile was small, trembling at the edges. "You make me remember too." The words hung there, simple, sincere, infinite. He reached for her hand. She let him. Their fingers intertwined, awkward at first, then natural, like something they'd both been unconsciously waiting for. They didn't need to say the word love. It was there already, in the pauses, in the warmth between palms, in the gentle way they stood close but didn't rush it. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was human, slow, earnest, the kind of beginning that doesn't shout but simply exists. As they stood under that light, the city around them moved on, cars passing, laughter echoing from a nearby bar, but for them, time had found a way to slow down. In that stillness, Ethan realized something quietly profound. This was what peace felt like. Not in power, not in success, but in connection. He squeezed her hand gently. She looked up at him, smiling. "Ready to go home?" he asked. She nodded. "As long as you don't walk too fast." He smiled. "Not tonight," and together. They began walking slow steps beneath the amber glow of the streetlights into a night that no longer felt empty. The morning of the shareholder meeting began like any other. At least, that's what everyone thought. The conference hall gleamed glass walls, dark wood, rows of suits and watches that cost more than Clara's car. Everything in the room spoke the same language: control, wealth, precision. Ethan stood near the window, hands clasped behind his back, watching the city below. He'd done this speech a dozen times before quarterly reports, projections, profits, but this time felt different. His heartbeat was steady, yet heavy, like it knew what was coming before he did. Clara stood a few feet away, checking through the files one last time. She wore a simple navy dress, hair tied back, eyes calm but alert. When she looked up, she caught his reflection in the glass. There was something in his face she hadn't seen before. Not tension, not calculation, just quiet resolve. "Ready?" she asked softly. He turned. For a moment, he only looked at her. Almost. Their eyes held for a second too long. Long enough for the world outside to fade into a blur. When the meeting began, the room filled quickly: board members, investors, advisors. Cameras clicked, the murmur of money and power. Ethan's name echoed through the hall, followed by polite applause. He stepped up to the podium, his expression composed as always. But inside, something was shifting. The weight he'd carried for years, the fear of judgment, the need for control. It all felt smaller now. He started with numbers, as expected. Growth charts, market expansion, the rhythm of corporate success. Clara watched from the side, as she always did, calm and steady. But as he spoke, his eyes drifted toward her again and again, small, fleeting glances that anchored him. And then, somewhere between projections and profits, he stopped. A silence rippled through the room. Ethan looked down at the pages in front of him, then closed them. He took a slow breath, the kind that feels like standing on the edge of something vast. "There's something else I want to say," he began, his voice quieter now, lower, something that doesn't belong on these reports, but maybe should have all along. A few confused murmurs spread across the hall. He looked out over the faces staring back: investors, journalists, his own board, then, finally, to Clara. She stood perfectly still. "For a long time," he continued, "I built this company with the belief that strength meant never showing weakness, that leadership meant distance, that caring was a liability." He paused, the faintest tremor in his voice. But I was wrong. The air seemed to tighten around his words. Every eye was on him. "I was wrong," he said again, stronger this time, "because no amount of power or profit means anything if you live your life behind walls. I've learned that from someone who walked into those walls uninvited and somehow taught me how to open a door." The room was completely silent now. Even the lights felt still. Ethan turned his head slightly, meeting Clara's eyes, and then, before anyone could react, he stepped away from the podium. He walked across the room, each step deliberate. People shifted in their seats, whispering. Cameras followed. Clara's heart pounded. When he reached her, he didn't say a word at first. He simply took her hand firm, certain, and faced the room again. "This is Clara Bennett," he said, voice steady but full. "She's not just my assistant." He glanced down at her, eyes softening. She's the reason I'm standing here today as a better man than I was yesterday. A low murmur swept through the audience. He didn't flinch. I know this isn't what you expect from me, but I've spent my life doing what people expect. Today, I'd rather do what's right. He turned to Clara again, and for a brief, suspended moment under the weight of 1,000 eyes, the world seemed to shrink until it was just the two of them. She's not just the person who organizes my life, he said quietly. She's the person who's changed it. Clara's breath caught. Ethan, she whispered, but he shook his head gently, not to stop her, but to steady himself. And then, with a small, unguarded smile, he said the words that would change everything. She's not just my assistant, she's the woman I love. The room fell into stunned silence. Cameras clicked, someone gasped, a few whispered too loudly. But Ethan didn't look away from her. His hand still held hers steady. Sure, without apology. Clara's eyes shimmered. You just told the entire board, she murmured, half in disbelief. I know, he said, smiling softly. About time, they heard something real. A few claps began at the back of the room, hesitant, uncertain, then more joined. Linda Harris, from HR, was the first to stand, smiling through tears. Soon the entire hall erupted in applause. Ethan turned back to Clara, the noise blurring into a soft hum around them. You okay? He asked quietly. She let out a trembling laugh. You're insane. Maybe, he said, eyes gleaming. But for once, I don't care. He squeezed her hand again, not to show possession, but to share strength. For the first time in his career, he wasn't performing. He was simply present, human. When the meeting finally adjourned, people came up, some congratulating, some whispering, some unsure what to make of it. Ethan barely heard them. He was watching Clara, who looked equal parts nervous and proud. As they walked out of the hall together, flashes still going off behind them, Clara leaned closer and whispered, You really didn't plan that, did you? He chuckled. Not exactly. It just felt like the right time to stop hiding. She smiled. You realize this is going to be everywhere tomorrow. He nodded. Let it. They stepped out into the hallway, sunlight streaming through tall windows, dust motes floating in golden air. For the first time in years, Ethan felt light. I don't care what happens next, he said quietly. For the first time, it feels honest. Clara squeezed his hand, smiling. Then it's perfect. He looked at her, then the woman who'd walked into his fortress and lit a fire instead of tearing down the walls. And as they walked side by side through the glass doors, cameras flashing behind them, something inside him settled into peace. He wasn't the man who ruled through fear anymore. He was just Ethan, flawed, open, finally free. The applause still echoed behind them as they stepped out of the building. For a moment, Ethan didn't quite believe it had happened, the clapping, the words, the courage. The sunlight was sharp against the glass walls of Hawthorne Enterprises, but it didn't feel cold anymore. It felt alive. Clara walked beside him, her hand still in his. The air smelled faintly of rain and coffee, that same familiar scent that had started it all. Outside, employees stood watching from the lobby windows. Some smiled, some whispered, a few even waved. Ethan caught Linda's eye through the glass. She mouthed, "Good for you," and he couldn't help but smile. They crossed the plaza slowly, like two people stepping out of a storm that had lasted far too long. The city stretched out before them, busy, bright, humming with a life that had nothing to do with stock prices or boardrooms. For the first time in years, Ethan wasn't thinking about the next meeting, the next goal, the next battle to win. He was thinking about the woman beside him, about how strange it felt to simply walk and be. A few reporters were waiting by the steps, cameras flashing, voices calling his name. He stopped, looked at them for a second, then shook his head gently and kept walking. Clara squeezed his hand, a quiet anchor in the noise. When they reached the street corner, the light turned red. They waited, side by side, the city breathing around them. Clara tilted her head toward him. "You okay?" He smiled faintly. "Better than I've been in a long time." The walk signal blinked green. They crossed together, slow, unhurried, like two people no longer rushing toward or away from anything. Across the street stood the small cafe near the harbor, the one where Clara used to sit with her laptop, surrounded by rejection emails and half-drunk cups of hope. The bell above the door still jingled the same way when she pushed it open. Inside, the smell of roasted beans and vanilla wrapped around them like an old memory. The same barista looked up, eyes widening a little in recognition. "Long time no see," she said to Clara, smiling. Clara laughed softly. "Yeah, feels like another lifetime." They took a table by the window, the same spot where she once stared at a future that refused to open. Outside, the water shimmered under the afternoon sun. Ethan sat opposite her, still wearing that look part wonder, part disbelief. "You used to come here," he asked. "Almost every day," she said. "It was my thinking place. My trying to stay hopeful place?" He smiled. "Guess it worked." She stirred her coffee absently. "Funny, isn't it? How life can change because of one small thing, one choice, one moment." He glanced down at his cup, then at her. "Or one spill," he said, smiling. She laughed the kind of laugh that fills the air softly, like sunlight through curtains. "Yeah, one spill." They sat there in silence for a while, not awkward, just easy. Outside, a breeze moved through the open door, carrying in the faint sound of the harbor, the cry of a gull, the rhythm of distant waves. Ethan leaned back, eyes on the window. "You know, I used to think everything had to be perfect," he said quietly. "Every number, every plan, every day, but somehow, the best thing that ever happened to me was a mistake." Clara reached across the table and touched his hand. "Maybe it wasn't a mistake," she said softly. "Maybe it was destiny wearing clumsy shoes." He laughed, shaking his head. "You always know how to ruin a serious moment, or save it," she said, smiling. He looked at her for a long time, the way someone looks at something they never thought they'd find, not grand or dramatic, just deeply, quietly real. For once, he didn't feel like the man everyone feared. He didn't feel like the CEO who had to hold the world in place. He just felt human and free. Clara squeezed his hand gently. "You know," she said, "people will keep talking. About us. About today." "I know," he replied. "Let them. Maybe they'll start talking about the right things for a change." The barista brought their drinks 2 cups of coffee, dark and steaming. Ethan looked at his, then at hers. "Let's see if I can drink this one without an accident." She grinned. No promises. He took a sip, slow, careful. The taste was rich, familiar, warm. For the first time, he didn't feel the need to rush back to the office. Outside, the light shifted clouds moving gently across the sun. The glass towers of downtown reflected gold. For a moment, the whole city seemed softer. They talked for a long time about little things, not business or pressure or the past. About a new book Clara wanted to read. About the way the rain on the windows made the skyline look like watercolor. About nothing, really, and everything. As the afternoon stretched into early evening, Ethan stood and walked to the counter. He returned with 2 napkins and a pen. On one, he wrote something and slid it across the table. Clara read it. Just 7 words. Sometimes the best things start by accident. She smiled, folded the napkin carefully, and tucked it into her purse. "You know, you should write more," she said. He shrugged. "Maybe I just needed the right story." She tilted her head. "And the right co-author?" "Exactly." Outside, the sun dipped lower, spilling amber light across the cafe floor. The world kept moving, cars, people, noise, but inside, it felt like everything had slowed to a tender pause. Ethan looked at Clara again, and something inside him, something old and hard, finally let go. The fear, the walls, the weight, all of it gone. In one quiet breath, he smiled. "You ready?" She nodded. "Always." They stood, walked out together, hand in hand. The door chimed softly behind them, and for a moment, the city looked almost new. The same streets, the same skyline, but seen through lighter eyes. Ethan looked up at the glass tower across the street, the one with his name at the top. It gleamed against the sky. Then he looked at Clara, and for the first time, he didn't see a company behind him or a legacy ahead. Just the present, just her. They started walking again, slow, steady, into the fading light. And if anyone had been watching, they would have seen it too, the way a man once feared by everyone now walked like someone who finally remembered how to love, and how to be loved in return. Sometimes, destiny begins with nothing more than a spilled cup of coffee. Sometimes the most important lessons in life arrive quietly, not through success or victory, but through the moments that humble us. Ethan's story reminds us that strength isn't found in control or perfection, but in the courage to be open. For years, he led with fear, believing that power could protect him from pain. Yet, it was kindness, not authority, that finally set him free. We all build walls around our hearts, our pride, our memories, thinking they'll keep us safe. But love, patience, and understanding have a way of finding the cracks. Clara didn't change Ethan by force. She changed him by simply seeing him, by showing that gentleness can be just as powerful as ambition. In our own lives, maybe that's the quiet invitation this story leaves us, to look beyond people's sharp edges, to listen before we judge, and to offer warmth where the world has grown cold. Because sometimes, healing doesn't come from grand gestures. It begins with something small, accidental, human, like a spilled cup of coffee and a heart willing to stay. Thank you, dear listener, for sharing your time and heart with this story. If it touched you even just a little, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to Shining Stories. Every click helps these gentle tales reach more hearts who might need a reminder of kindness and hope. Your support keeps this channel alive, and together, we can keep shining a little light into the world, one story at a time.